the first meeting between a sitting U.S. president and a leader of North Korea.
Do we need to see the nuclear stockpile being removed, or do we need to see IAEA inspectors coming in?
I don't think we've yet come up with a common definition of what denuclearization really means.
Their nuclear weapons are their insurance card. Well,
I don't see any relaxation of sanctions coming out of this upcoming meeting.
if you want to put a high bar to it, I mean, I do want to see concrete steps being made.
From the Voice of America, this is Washington Talk.
Hello and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun-jung Cho. We're only days away from the historic summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. President Trump expressed optimism ahead of the summit, but made clear he will not stand for a bad deal. Will North Korea give up its weapons and choose a bright new future?
We look forward to seeing you, and we look forward to the summit, and hopefully some wonderful things will work out.
Now my guest today, Professor Andrew Yeo at the Catholic University of America. Professor Yeo is an associate professor of politics and director of the Asian Studies programs there. His research focuses on East Asia and U.S.-South Korea relations. Also joining us today, Ambassador Thomas Hubbard, the chairman of the Korea Society and senior director of the McLarty Associates. A Korea Foreign Service officer for nearly 40 years, he served as U.S. ambassador to the Republic of Korea from 2001 to 2004 and was a senior negotiator with North Korea in the 1990s. Welcome to the program.
Thank
Pleasure
you.
to be
It's good to be
here.
here.
Thank you.
Great. Ambassador, why don't I begin with you? President Trump said the summit will be the start of something big. So how important is this summit to the U.S. national security?
Well, this is a very important meeting, first and foremost, because North Korea really is is probably the most pressing national security challenge that we face now in the United States and elsewhere in the world. So it's North Korea's nuclear weapons program, its missile programs are issues that need to be dealt with urgently. And it's also important because it will be the first meeting between a U.S. president and a leader of a sitting U.S. president and a leader of North Korea. It's a very unusual way of beginning these negotiations, but I, along with President Trump, hope that this will be the start of something big.
Mm-hmm. Well, if any of you can take this question, Secretary Pompeo on Thursday at the White House said that to make denuclearization and security guarantee to happen, we need to make bold decisions. And Secretary said that he is hopeful Chairman Kim is prepared to make that decision for his country. So it seems the decision at the highest level has yet to be made. And would this decision be on the specific format of denuclearization?
Well, I'll just say, just reading Pompeo's readout yesterday, that he was clear that Kim Jong-un understands what the U.S. is asking at this point, and that's comprehensive, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. And so leader Kim knows that, but it's a question of the sequencing, the timetable of how long should this process take? Do we do this all in one swoop? So I do think Kim Jong-un is ready to move towards denuclearization, but they're going to have, this is what the summit is for, they're going to try to figure out what are the next steps.
Mm-hmm. And it's only been 3 months since we made the decision to have this meeting and prepared for this. Was this enough time to narrow the gap on the concept of denuclearization? Any one of you?
Personally, I don't think so. I don't think we've yet come up with a common definition of what denuclearization really means. The North Koreans keep talking about denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We talk about dismantlement of the North Korean nuclear program, and I think there are a lot of details that have to be worked out. And I'm pleased that yesterday President Trump voiced optimism, but he also recognized that it's going to be a process, that it will take more than one meeting and a lot of talks to actually narrow those differences.
Professor, as long as we get CVID from North Korea, is it okay for us to, make it in a phased process as North Korea wants?
Well, of course, in an ideal world, the U.S. would hope that North Korea would lay out their nuclear weapons from the get-go. But we have to be realistic about this. And so the fact that they're talking, that there's a summit happening, I think that's a good start. But I think the U.S. Negotiators know that this isn't going to be a one-shot move. So I think what they're going to be discussing is, what should that timetable look like? What's the sequencing? What steps need to come first before the U.S. makes measures? For instance, rolling back the sanctions. Do we need to see the nuclear stockpile being removed, or do we need to see IAEA inspectors coming in? So those are the things I think that we should be looking out for from this meeting.
And speaking about the stockpiles, it seems reportedly at the advanced meetings, North Korea expressed reluctance to hand over the existing stockpiles early in the process. So where does this resistance come from?
Well, their nuclear weapons are their insurance card, or what I like to call the family jewels, and you don't want to give them up without knowing for certain what the U.S. may be willing to offer. So from the North Korean side, they don't have an incentive to give everything up all in one swoop.
No, I think that's right. It's the North Korean leadership sees this nuclear capability as key to its own survival and key to the future of the country. They have, thus far in this process, been willing to freeze their testing of both nuclear explosive devices and of missiles. But so far, they have not indicated any willingness to give up their existing stockpile of weapons-grade material, and I think that will probably come somewhere near the end of the process.
I see. And another important pillar of this negotiations is giving security guarantee to North Korea. What should the United States not do in giving a security guarantee to North Korea?
Well, the United States, of course, cannot guarantee the survival of a leader in any country, not to mention North Korea. But what we have indicated so far is that we don't seek regime change in North Korea, that we are prepared to work with the regime that exists there to resolve our problems. I do think the North Koreans are going to be looking for something more, and that something more may relate to the whole issue of peace on the Korean Peninsula and the role of the U.S.-South Korea alliance and our forces there as we go forward.
And what about sanctions? When should we ease sanctions for North Korea?
Well, I think the President Trump has made very clear that we don't plan to ease sanctions until we see concrete evidence that North Korea is giving up its nuclear weapons program and its missile programs and all of their elements. I think inevitably, once we get into talks, and particularly if we get into phase talks, which I also think is inevitable, that there's going to be some trade-off.
Yeah, absolutely. From a starting position, when you're bargaining, you don't want to give up the sanctions to begin with, and I do think that there has to be some concrete steps or measures to end the nuclear program before they roll back sanctions. There's some that are saying that the U.S. is going to have to offer something at the table because North Koreans have released the 3 Americans because they haven't tested any missiles or they haven't conducted any nuclear tests. But we really need to see concrete steps that North Korea is serious about denuclearization before the sanctions are rolled back. Otherwise, we're going to have the same cycle repeating again, as Ambassador Hubbard knows very well.
What about human rights? Should we talk about human rights early in the process, or would that kind of be a hindrance to the denuclearization talks?
In my view, human rights should be part of the process. But I think our priority objective is the elimination of the programs that threaten the United States and our friends and allies in the region, that is the nuclear weapons program and the missile programs.
Right, I agree. 20 years ago, there wasn't as much discussion about human rights. But we had the UN Commission of Inquiry come out with a report. Everyone is aware about these North Korean human rights abuses. So, I do think the focus is on denuclearization, but I absolutely think that Trump should bring up the human rights issues, and I believe he will. At the State of the Union, he had addressed human rights. He's met with human rights defectors, and so I do think it's something that he should, and I believe he will bring up in his talks with Kim Jong-un.
And Ambassador, you were in charge of preparing for the protocol for Secretary Madeleine Albright's visit to Pyongyang in 2000. So what was most notable about the North Korean officials in preparing for a high-level meeting with the United States?
Well, they are very meticulous in their preparation, and they do want the visit to go the way they design it. And I have mentioned when I prepared Madeleine Albright's visit to Pyongyang, we were also exploring whether it was possible for President Clinton to visit Pyongyang. And so I discovered that we really couldn't, for example, the North Koreans would not tell us, when and where Secretary Albright would meet with Kim Jong-il, the leader of the time, until she arrived. Well, that's very hard to do. When you're dealing with a presidential visit, you need to know these things in advance. And so I think the fact that this meeting is not being held in Pyongyang, where the North Koreans kind of control the shots, is itself a plus. We are much better off doing it in a third country, and Singapore is a very good place.
Well, before we go, my last question, first to Professor and then to Ambassador. So what would be a successful outcome for the United States from the summit?
Sure. So, if we set a very low bar, that Trump doesn't walk out or get angry, that we actually have the meeting, but then also that there's some statement or commitment that both sides are willing to move forward with denuclearization. I think that would be a low bar success. If you want to put a high bar to it, I do want to see concrete steps being made, particularly on the North Korean side, for denuclearization. And then for the U.S., it may be too premature to talk about what the U.S. may be willing to give up, but for me, if it's a win if they actually come and have this meeting, and that sets the tone for whatever follow-ups are to come next.
Ambassador?
I agree with that, but I would add that I also hope this meeting will indeed be the start of a process that will lead where we're trying to go, which is in the end game, to eliminate North Korea's threatening nuclear and missile programs. And so if we can come up with a process, if we can come up with acknowledgement by the North Koreans that, dismantlement is what we're seeking at the end of the process, and set that in motion, I think it will be good.
Well, on that hopeful note, we'll end this conversation here and watch video for our next discussion.
Okay.
이 위대한 승리는 당의 병진 노선과 과학정치 사상의 정당성과 생활력의 뚜렷한 정체입니다.
Be in his country. He'd be running his country. His country would be very rich. His people are.
The Trump administration is vowing to help North Korea achieve economic prosperity if it eliminates nuclear arsenal. The idea is to have U.S. private companies make investments in North Korea and get neighboring countries, South Korea, Japan, and China, also make contributions. Now, Professor, can you envision major U.S. private investment in North Korea? Is North Korea an attractive investment destination?
Well, I almost want to laugh when you say if it's an attractive investment place. Right? Currently, no, because of the sanctions. Nothing can really take place until you roll back the sanctions. And in terms of infrastructure, rule of law, or in terms of being able to make business transactions, none of that is in place. But that being said, there are markets that could be tapped. I heard there could be possibly fishing industry or mining could be some things that you may be able to develop. And also, we got to remember that with North Korea, this could be a source of labor in terms of things like textiles or in terms of investing. I think there is potential there, but it's going to take years. It's going to take a while because the infrastructure in place isn't really set up.
So what should be the United States government, the role? I mean, should it give some kind of guarantee or inducements for private companies to go in?
Well, at some stage, I think, even though the Trump administration says there will be no U.S. government assistance to North Korea, that in the final analysis, there's going to have to be some government role, either through providing investment guarantees, through OPIC and our other organs that are trade and development agency that are there. We may not give actual economic assistance, but there will have to be some kind of government role in that. But I think the key to making North Korea an attractive place for investment is economic reform. That American companies are not going into a country where there is no rule of law, where there's not a framework for investment, not the infrastructure you need for it. So it's going to take, as the professor says, it will take a long time.
Recent CIA analysis says that Chairman Kim may be open to open a Western burger franchise in North Korea as a gesture of goodwill. How significant is this?
Well, it's more symbolic than anything else. I guess Kim Jong-un likes hamburgers. Trump likes hamburgers, so that's a good sign.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it would be more symbolic than anything else. But it's a start, and if that's something that the North Koreans want, maybe McDonald's or some other corporation can look into that.
I might just share an anecdote. When we were in Geneva doing the negotiations with the North Koreans, and in fact, right after, and this was in 1993-94, when Kim Il-sung died, the North Koreans actually served us Big Macs in a meeting shortly thereafter. I was quite surprised after a serious talk. The North Korean wives came in with Big Macs, and there was a sign to me there is some symbolic value to it, and they thought we would like Big Macs too. So
Were they knockoff Big Macs or the real deal?
they were in Geneva.
Okay.
So they were
Geneva. Okay, I
so
see.
they were the real thing.
Well, good.
Just briefly before we go, President Trump said several times that neighboring countries will foot the bill. So what will be their reaction when President Trump is openly saying that U.S. government will not actually give any economic assistance to North Korea?
Well, I think China will continue to be the main lifeline for North Korea and is likely to give quite a lot of assistance as we move forward in this process. South Korea, I think, will be very anxious to move forward as we begin to lift sanctions and move towards denuclearization and reconciliation on the peninsula. Japan will be more reluctant, but the big issue is the Japanese abductees. And Prime Minister Abe yesterday, after his meeting with President Trump, made very clear that there will not be Japanese assistance until they deal satisfactorily with that problem, as well as with denuclearization and elimination of threatening missiles.
Well, we'll end discussion here and move on to our next segment. Now, time for the photo moment, a time to look at an interesting North Korea picture. Today we have pictures from Singapore. For local restaurants, upcoming summit between President Trump and Chairman Kim is a chance to introduce commemorative menus. Local dish, Trump Kimchi Nasi Lemak and Taco Summit are among the new menus developed. Now, Andrew, what's your reaction?
Right, it's almost a comical image here, but I think it does show the hope, or there's an anticipation or expectation that something beautiful may come out of this meeting, to use Trump's phrase. So it is comical, but I think it's more on the side of optimism that something good will happen.
Ambassador?
Well, I agree with that comment, and I do think, we have two very extraordinary personalities involved here, and President Trump and Kim Jong-un, dictator though he is, showed a great deal of PR skill when he had his meeting with President Moon of South Korea and his visit there. And so, there is a certain excitement that somehow, as President Trump says, this meeting might be the start of something good, and this is well reflected in this picture.
Yeah, well, that's all the time we have for this week. Thank you for joining us, Ambassador, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. That's,
And this was Washington Talk from the Voice of America, and I'm Eun-jung Cho. We will have a U.S.-North Korea Summit special programming on the 12th, so please join us then.